What is up, fellow sickos? I am Dan Favelli coming at you with a trade reaction podcast that will be the podcast in lieu of your typical Tuesday episode, unless another trade happens. We do go normally, if you're new around these parts, Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, with full-length episodes, sometimes with bonus ones sprinkled in there. But Dorian Finney-Smith headed to the Los Angeles Lakers, a move that the Dorian Finney-Smith trade did not come out of nowhere. The Lakers being the destination is something of a surprise, if only because the Grizzlies were the team that was linked most heavily to DFS since the Dennis Schroeder trade. The Lakers trade, though, let's get to the trade details. We always got to start with the trade details. So the Brooklyn Nets are getting D'Angelo Russell on an expiring contract. Maxwell Lewis has some time left on his deal, someone that they will actually probably put into their lineup. They're in full-on experimental mode, and they're getting 3 second-round picks, and we already have the details on those picks. They're the Lakers' own in 2027, 2030, and 2031, and so that's shorting the Lakers' future. The Lakers will receive Dorian Finney-Smith. He has a player option for $15.4 million next season, and Shake Milton. The final 2 years of his deal are non-guaranteed. The two other notes from this trade that I think are important, and we'll get into them in additional detail momentarily. The Lakers are now $3.5 million below the second apron. They were something like, it was sub 50K beneath the second apron. That's just extra flexibility. And so it makes trades somewhat easier, but they still can't take back more money than they receive. But it's more flexibility for if they want to fill out their roster, come buyout market time, where if they want to go after guys who contracts, they're either waived maybe post a trade, or they at trade deadline passes and they negotiate a buyout and then they want to sign with a new team. The Lakers, as of now, will have more money with which to bandy about there. Again, we always tend to over romanticize those types of additions, but the extra flexibility is big. And we know, because they're run like a mom and pop shop, that they'll appreciate the luxury tax savings as well. And then the Nets now, so they don't necessarily increase their cap space for 2025 with this trade, but they theoretically can, because if you believe Dorian Finney-Smith is going to pick up his player option, you're now replacing him with a sub $2 million salary in Maxwell Lewis, because D'Angelo Russell comes off the books. And so Brooklyn is now in line for, I have them at, given what their current draft positioning would be and the other draft picks that they have, about 75 plus million in cap space. And so in theory, like functionally speaking, they may have increased their cap space, and that will be worth getting into. Of course, we have to wait and see how the rest of the deadline plays out. Let's start with the Nets here, because there's probably more of an analysis to be done on the Lakers. So let's go through the Nets part of this really quick. They don't get a first round pick for Dennis Schroeder or Dorian Finney-Smith. I really thought they'd get a late first for Dorian Finney-Smith. However, they're +5 second round picks from these two trades without taking back any bad money or super long-term money that's over $2 million a season. That is a win, I would say, or at least it's a net neutral move. We have to see how the deadline plays out, but it's starting to make me think, does Brooklyn have plans for its cap space given these deals? And if they do, does that make it more likely that we see a Nick Claxton or a Cam Johnson trade, because then they're just going to monopolize all the cap space possible, especially if they're getting expiring salary in return? The other thing here too is, so they could have, it seemed like, per the reporting from Mark Stein, it did seem like the holdup in a Grizzlies deal for Dorian Finney-Smith was they were going to send out Luke Kennard, John Conchar, and I guess a 2026 first round pick. I assume it would have been heavily protected. I think you could reasonably argue that two of these Lakers second round picks might amount to more value than whatever their protections were in that 2026 pick from Memphis, because you're probably looking at, if you project that to be number 22 or worse, there's value in getting in the first round. But if you think the Lakers are going to be a team in the 30s at least twice during that stretch, again, you're rolling the dice there. The bigger thing, though, aside from, again, they're taking back expiring money in D'Angelo Russell rather than John Conchar, who has a few seasons left at $6-7 million a pop. Luke Kennard technically has the implicit no trade clause because of the contract that he signed, and he would forfeit his bird rights if moved. I'm actually surprised that he was able to retain that veto power. I would have thought the Grizzlies would have gotten him to waive that as part of, they declined his team option, yes, and so he took less money to come back, but who was giving Luke Kennard $9+ million for even a single season of work, given his injury history? Maybe there was a team out there, but if that's what kind of derailed the deal. Maybe he didn't want to go to Brooklyn because he knew that they were a team that wouldn't value his bird rights. And so it's an easier sell for him to say, hey, I'll go to a team that might want to keep me around and then pay me off of this number. That would be short-sighted on his part, I think, in return, because if you're going to be bad, you kind of want to overpay shooters. And in Brooklyn, if he's healthy, I assume maybe they look to reroute him, but he would have played a bunch, and maybe that would have inflated his numbers and put him in a good position entering free agency to be part of the someone who could get a mid-level deal or a large chunk of a mid-level, or at least the full non-taxpayers, at least like the full taxpayers mid-level over the course of multiple years. Interesting if that was the hangup. I'm not saying if that's what it was, but it felt like those talks were progressing until they weren't. And so those are maybe two factors to kind of think about is, did Brooklyn not really want John Konchar's money? And did Luke Kennard not want to go to Brooklyn? One of those two things, I think, or if not both, would be my guess that it came into play. For the Nets, their offense is dead last in points scored per possession since the Dennis Schroeder trade. That is no surprise, given that Cam Thomas has been injured and that Dennis Schroeder was driving a lot of what they do. D'Lo can help there. He probably had his best years in Brooklyn, and you're not looking to win games right now, but to help drive just some type of offense that's not dead last in the league, even as you're looking to make up ground in the tanking race. And look, D'Lo can also, I'm talking about the Nets' cap space, which looks $75+ million at a time where next summer, free agency class, whatever, that cap space can be used to complete trades or to take on money that's attached to draft picks. There's no other team that's even going to come close to having Brooklyn's projected cap space right now. I think the next closest, like if we're practically speaking, maybe Washington can carve out, I don't know, like some like 30+ million. Detroit can do a bunch of weird things if they want to, but you're not looking in the realm of 60, 70. There's none of those. There's no other team that projects to have that kind of cap space right now. That's just valuable because you're then unique. I'm now wondering, just based off these returns, if that's part of the calculus. That being said, D'Angelo Russell can still be traded. And so they can take that large expiring number and turn around and like move it for another long-term salary or salaries that are coming attached to draft equity or prospects. I mean, $18.7 million is a nice chunk of change. It's easier. You can take back more money for him than you could have if you traded Dorian Finney-Smith as a standalone. That's something I'll be monitoring. And it's more so the larger direction of the Nets now beyond this season, where I'd kind of just assumed that they wouldn't care about their cap space as much. Yeah, conserve some of it, use some of it. But at this point, I'm wondering if they're actively prioritizing it, which would make them very interesting to monitor heading into the offseason and free agency, and more, I would say, critically, the trade market. Again, whether it's to lease out that cap space or to like go out and use it via trades or free agency. I think the Nets have now succeeded in ensuring they will not be good enough to ruin their lottery odds. You're never going to catch the Wizards or the Pelicans or the Jazz at this point, but you're probably have a good chance of being as bad, if not worse, than the Hornets, the Raptors, the Blazers even, and then certainly in like the Kings and the Spurs and the other teams there. The Pistons are too good. The Bulls are too good as of right now. So that puts Brooklyn in, now I would successfully say, prime position to have a bottom 5 record. Like bottom 4 could be tough because that's the Pelicans, the Wizards, the Raptors, Hornets, Jazz, and Blazers are all below them. And of those teams, I could envision Toronto, as it continues to get healthier, maybe winning too many games. And what is Charlotte actually trying to do? But the Jazz and Blazers aren't interested in winning. They should have. Look, if they want a bottom 4 record, they're about 5 losses off. They're 4 losses off of a bottom 5 record. They seem set up to achieve that goal. The bigger implications here, though, are for the Lakers, not just because they're the Lakers, but they're actually trying to win here. And so this team does not, some people feel a type of way about Max Christie. I think that is fine. This team does not have a two-way wing on its roster, and it really hasn't for quite some time. And the closest they've probably come to typifying it since the Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, Alex Caruso, even Kyle Kuzma days is probably Taurean Prince or Cam Reddish or Max Christie. That's not great. That's no great shakes there. And look, to Los Angeles's credit, if you look at the standings right now, just by terms of winning percentage, they technically have a top 8 record in the league. So, like, that's a pretty big deal. They are 5th in the Western Conference, and they're 2 losses off of second place in Memphis. Or 3 losses off, excuse me. I saw some reactions, like initial reactions on Twitter and Blue Sky to this of just like, well, what does this do for them aside from kind of keep them in that same tier? That's a big deal. You didn't give up a first round pick and you actively got better. You have a two-way wing, which is an archetype of player that you didn't previously have. And when you're looking at the goal, yeah, you want them to contend for a title, and we could talk about whether there's more moves to follow. This helps balance out your rotation a little bit. And like I said, you didn't give up a first round pick. And that's what going for it looks like in the Western Conference. Yeah, they might have solidified their place in the top 6, maybe. You can't even say that because Denver and Minnesota, they could each play better. Maybe even the Warriors and the Suns get hot, the Kings too. So nothing's ever safe. That's sort of kind of the point, is that if you're a top 6 team in the West, like, you're probably pretty damn good. I don't think the Lakers are pretty damn good. There's just a lot of noise coming into how they got here. They are, however, quietly 11th in points allowed per possession for the month of December. The offense has suffered, and that does get into some interesting stuff here with them. So off rip, I just think having Dorian Finney-Smith on defense, and he's probably not the same player he was peak Dallas, but he is immediately their best perimeter defensive. But you can't talk me really into anyone else. Maybe Jared Vanderbilt if he was healthy. When he's healthy, maybe. That's a big deal. And it should make life in a lot of combinations easier on Anthony Davis, but also maybe not make some of LeBron's miscues as egregious, perhaps, this season. And you're getting someone who, look, the Lakers, they're not a good three-point shooting team. They are 27th in three-point volume and 18th in three-point percentage. Dorian Finney-Smith is shooting 43.5% on 5.4 three-point attempts per game. That performance might not hold because it's an outlier relative to the other stuff that he has done, but he's always been someone who can hit a wide open three off the catch, and the Lakers need that. Where it is worth noting, though, is that Dorian Finney-Smith is not, even with his volume, which I think per minute, you probably want that to come up, and we'll see if the Lakers can do that. He's not someone that like teams are overly concerned about because we've seen him go through either cold stretches before, just be a mediocre shooter. Even this year, he is still rates below average in his off-ball gravity. It's about league average. It's the 49th percentile, so it's close, but it's not like he's in the 80th. And then in spot-up points per shot, he's still in the 34th percentile this year. So it's not like they've now opened the floor a bunch, but they've gotten another complementary player who maybe defenses aren't as likely to close out on him, but it does simplify the mouths you need to feed. And even with D'Angelo Russell running units on his own or playing independent of a bunch of starters, it does simplify things a little bit. However, it is worth noting that the Lakers ranked in the 74th percentile of offense with D'Lo on the court this year, and they're in the 32nd percentile without him. When you add LeBron to those non-D'Lo minutes, the Lakers are in the 40th percentile of offense. You now add AD to those LeBron minutes without D'Lo, you're still only in the 55th. And you now look at this team and say, I know Austin Reeves is having a good year. You still have, maybe this is to some degree, not just a vote of confidence in Anthony Davis, but also LeBron, of saying, well, he can still shoulder more on offense. And maybe that's where he's kind of at his most comfortable. And so removing D'Lo from the equation, it, again, not even looking directly at lineups LeBron was already involved in, but maybe it forces you to test out other lineups that will feature LeBron in more of a way that he's used to. And perhaps that would, because look, his offensive numbers this season on paper, they're absolutely fine. He does not have the same level of burst, but is this just a vote of confidence in him being able to do more than, as I guess I would say, as a scorer specifically? What is it 9 assists per game this year? So I don't know how much more you want him to do as a playmaker, but you have lost shot creation and playmaking as the result of this trade. Now, it wasn't particularly efficient shot creating or playmaking, and that's why maybe it's worth a roll of the dice of saying, hey, Dorian Finney-Smith will help us improve on the defensive end, and he at least won't submarine our offense. And their offense is, what would submarining even look like? They're 23rd in points per possession for the month of December. So they rank better on the season, but on the season, they're still only like league average in points scored per possession. I think they can't be much higher than that. They are they're 13th in points scored per possession. And when you look at the half court, they're 11th. And so that's where you might look at and say, okay, are they going to miss the ball handling of D'Angelo Russell? Which kind of brings me, though, to my next interesting question. What does this say about the Lakers' trade deadline direction or what they're willing to do for the rest of this season? Because I think you could look at this and reasonably argue, based off their track record, this is probably one of the better players who will get moved before the trade deadline anyway. And if they didn't have to give up a first round pick and they're still kind of uncertain about their standing in the Western Conference, is this it? Is this the big splash? And they made this move because it placates LeBron and AD to some extent, but it's not the all-in move. That might be what happens here. And we'll have to see. Maybe the Lakers are better off as currently constructed. There's a give and take to this trade. And like part of the give, though, or part of the take, I don't know what part of the one of the ends of that would be, well, they're more flexible. And so they could add on the buyout market if a great opportunity pops up. Or maybe they're able to find just like another kind of, I don't know, hit a single or a double that just sort of deepens their rotation. And you're still relying on LeBron and AD a bunch and Austin Reeves on the offensive end and even Rui a little bit. So maybe they just go out and get a backup big now. They're not even going to prioritize shot creation. They might go that route because this is the Lakers front office has not been especially aggressive over the past 2 years. Well, you could also look at it this way and say they acted early relative to the trade deadline, which is still more than 1 month away. They got one of the better players who's going to get moved. That's just in a vacuum. You're not going to convince me at this point that there are 5 players better than Dorian Finney-Smith who will be moved by the trade deadline. I hope it happens because I root for chaos and we spend so much time covering the news and the rumors and what these team needs. I'm always going to root for that chaos. But you now acquired this guy. You did it early. Does it speak to your faith in this team having another gear, not as currently constructed, but with the crux of what's constructed in place? And are you now more likely to go out and, well, we have these other needs. Like we still want to get another big man type. And I would say more critically now, do we want to go get another shot creator, floor general type? Because that is not an element that they have on the roster at this moment. Like you do have Gabe Vincent, but that's not Gabe Vincent's MO to run the offense. And so you've now said, okay, LeBron and even AD, but to a lesser extent, when you're talking about actively table setting, yeah, he's more of a hub this year. So LeBron, AD, and Reeves, more than anything, is what I look at this and say they either believe that these guys are just going to be able to figure it out without D'Lo. And again, I don't think D'Lo, the offense was better with him on the court this season. I just don't view him as a major loss because I'm probably jaded from what we've seen of him during his playoff runs with LA. So that's coloring me a little bit, but also just he wasn't having a spectacular season, certainly as a shot maker. And so I don't view him as that huge of a loss. I might just prove to be wrong, but if the offense was kind of already struggling this month and it was barely hovering around league average for the year, you can't convince me that the Lakers offense is now in more dire straits by going from D'Angelo Russell's minutes to Dorian Finney-Smith's minutes. I will be curious to see, and I didn't mention this with Dorian Finney-Smith specifically, whether he ends up starting for this team. My guess is immediately I would say no. It would probably surprise me, but I think there's a case to be made that, especially with D'Lo gone, would you rather the guy to move to the bench would be Rui? Unless you just want to be gargantuan when you start, which is just absolutely. So you're going to start Rui, DFS, Anthony Davis, LeBron, and then Austin Reeves. If that's what you want to do, I guess that's fine. But I'm looking at it through the vein of, and I don't know that they'll go this route. They might just say, hey, he's a midseason addition. We're going to stick with the current starting 5 that we have, which is, we've already gone through 4 of them. It's that plus Max Christie's been the one who's been getting starts at the moment. Do we stick with that? And that's fine. And just bring Dorian Finney-Smith off the bench. But I think you could, I'm not saying you should, make the case of, well, like if we just lost all the shot creation in theory off the bench, does it make sense to maybe move Rui there and try and make him more of a featured, not hub, but just option? Or is it, oh, okay, the current starting 5, I think on the season's a plus 14.4 per 100 when they're on the court. The caveat there being that it's been basically all that is coming all on the defensive end. They're in the 95th percentile of defense and the 18th percentile of of offense with that group. But it would be something to consider of, well, let's just bring Rui off the bench because we're so hard up for guys who can do anything on offense independent of our best players. I guess you could also make the case of why not move Reeves then? And then you go really gargantuan. They have a lot of options there, which is, look, they technically have those options with D'Lo, but Dorian Finney-Smith is going to be plug and play in more lineup makeups than D'Angelo Russell. That's just a fact. Looking more so to what this says about the macro for the Lakers, the big man, I mentioned that they need to go out and get like another floor general type, because I don't view Gabe Vincent or Austin Reeves pepper in Rui Hachimura, and then on top of having LeBron and AD, I just don't see that being enough in the aggregate. And they do have, look, they have Shake Milton now, so maybe the plan is to actively use Shake Milton, so I don't want to forget about him. But now you kind of look at them and say, all right, are you going to go out and maybe get an upgrade in the shot creation department, and preferably with someone who won't submarine your defense? Ironically, Dennis Schroeder, reunion with him would have made just a crap ton of sense on this team. Now you're kind of gauging the trade market, though. Now this is where it gets like incredibly difficult. You've now kind of played your last non-blockbuster hand, I would say. I guess you could still give up 1 first-round picks in hope of getting another floor general type to ease the burden on LeBron and AD specifically, or to run units when neither or with only one of them on the court. But like, who are you getting? Because there's not a ton of those. They have not been viewed as a Jimmy Butler team, and that's probably the right call. He would still be interesting. I mean, to get there with the making the money work, it might, it's going to cost you a bunch of rotation players, including Rui at this stage. But like, do you now lean into more like, can we go out and just get another shooter? We're going to continue to just try and open up the floor, or are you actively looking for that floor general type, and who on the trade market fits that bill? And they might be continued to be mentioned in the Trae Young category. He's not available. We know that like there's really, when you're kind of like considering, even if you were considering names that aren't available, De'Aaron Fox, LaMelo Ball, the Lakers, just their best offer just isn't going to be enough to get either one of those guys. There will just be teams with better offers lurking around every corner. And so I would have, unless like one of them, and Fox would have the most leverage, is trying to agitate his way to play with LeBron and AD, fellow clutch clients. I don't know what the bigger time move is that would feel realistic. And to be clear, I don't view either of those necessarily as realistic. But again, you have, your best trade offer probably still would have included those seconds, just like to really maximize the sweeteners. But you're now at least at a stage where, well, you still technically hit those future first round picks in 29 and 31 that have the most value of any of your assets. Now you're looking at it and you're saying, okay, those are still in place. Can you go out and do something with that? One or both of them. And that would be an interesting discussion to have, where it's, is there someone that you like where you can go out and just give up one and get them? Is there any moves to be made here where it's a 2-for-1? Like, do they try and roll the dice by using a Gabe Vincent and a Jared Vanderbilt to get a Terry Rozier? And is that even enough for the Miami Heat to bite on that and kind of just go after a distressed asset in that regard? There are names that could spring to mind here. Do they just decide, hey, why don't we step ladder our way to CJ McCollum if the Pelicans don't want any picks for him? That's like super complex too, though. I guess I don't know if this has increased or diminished their optionality on the trade market. I would argue it may have diminished that optionality. And that's not to say that they don't have options or they're somehow in a bad spot. I ultimately like this trade for them. The second round picks are kind of scary, but we do this all the time. We romanticize second round picks that are all the way out. The reason you almost have those second round picks as a team in the Lakers position is to get deals like this done. So you're not giving up. You're getting a player who's going to be, I would say, he's instantly one of the 6 or 7 most important players on this team, maybe even one of the 5 most important players. 5 or 6 most important players on this team. Like, that's why you use the second round pick. So I like this deal for them, but you've now played your non-blockbuster hand. And so if you're giving up, it's not just the idea of 1 first isn't a lot. And to other teams, when it's not that far off, when it's so far off, into the future, it's probably not going to be nearly as valuable to them unless they have the utmost front office job security, or if they're a team, and use the Nets as an example, that are kind of in the earlier stages of a rebuild that want to stockpile those distant assets. giving up one of those, who's the best player? Like, it was sort of the argument we had, or the discussion we would have last year. You're splitting the baby by just, instead of, would it be better to who's the best player we can get for 2, or do we just go out and get the best player we can get for 1? Regardless of who that player is, though, like, yeah, you give up both those picks, all the swaps that you need, Dalton Connect as well, if it gets you De'Aaron Fox, but that offer is also not on that level. And so what is the move now? I wish I had like better players. I was thinking a little bit about this before I was coming on. You're also in this weird spot of, would other teams even be willing to trade with you that are in the playoff? I mean, just as an example, let's just say OKC makes Aaron Wiggins available. Not really a point guard and not really a wing, but he's kind of like all of those things. If you include your 2027, maybe OKC feels confident enough in themselves to say, hey, yeah, we'll take your pick and we'll give you this player. But are those teams in the playoff hunt going to be willing to give you that type of player? Now, you could also do not even the split the baby route, but is it another? And I just don't know how you get there now, because you've exhausted your second round pick stash, essentially. Could you go out and get placeholders where it's, a Malcolm Brogdon? The Lakers would be able to match salary there fairly easily with 2 players, I believe. But that being said, you have the Clippers' 2025 second round pick. Does that get it done? And if it does, I mean, sure, go do it. Would you give up a first round pick to get Anthony Simons in here? Or do you that's not enough of a floor general for you? The Malcolm Brogdon route could be fairly interesting. That would then, I would assume the cost, if you're going after Brogdon for them as the matching salary, would have to be, I guess, just Vincent. And then you're not going to give up Rui in that deal. And it would be really funny to see him back on the Wizards anyway. Like, unless you're going to trade Max Christie for that, who has been playing a lot of late, it'd probably be Gabe Vincent and then Jared Vanderbilt. And is that second round pick enough for Washington to say, well, these guys have multiple years left on their contracts? That'll be part of the equation for other teams. I don't think there might be some teams that have this belief in Jared Vanderbilt, but the injuries are piling up. And so it's by far not the worst deal in the league, but the idea of having to pay Gabe Vincent for another season, I don't think a lot of teams are going to jump at that when he's shooting sub 35% from 3. He has been more available this year, though, and can still get after it on defense. It's just, I don't know, like, are those 2 in a second even going to get you a Malcolm Brogdon? I don't know. Could you, like, Kobe White? Would you give up 2 first round picks for Kobe White? I think in a vacuum you would, but that's someone who really elevates your now without being a face of the future. And the Lakers, if they're going to give up, they could argue that giving up 2 first round picks is also splitting the baby, because there are no swaps involved there. My point being, I do think that's probably, they're going to want to back up big, but maybe you could fold that into this larger deal. My main point here is, if they're serious about this season rather than just sort of being performative about competing, because if you're the front office and you're still mostly concerned about prioritizing the post LeBron era and not giving up those first round picks and not exhausting your asset stores, you're not going to care. You still make this trade, even with giving up those distant seconds. And so when the first round equity is involved, that's when we'll see, when that type of target emerges, that's when we'll see how committed to this roster the front office ultimately is. I don't know that this says anything one way or the other. It might be a matter of the right player becoming available or gettable. Or like the Lakers could look at it this way and say, now the Bulls have to take back 2 players and some of them have multiple years left on their contract. So what does it do? Like, if you just want Vooch, you can include Gabe Vincent and Jared Vanderbilt to get there. But are they going to want to take on money, because you're taking on money in that deal? And now you've lost the like expiring contract of D'Angelo Russell was kind of the appeal. You shouldn't need a lot of sweeteners to get Vooch on this team. But if you're looking for a backup big or a big to play next to Anthony Davis, that's maybe a move you could still get to without giving up a first round pick. I'm honestly not sure. You could certainly, I would think, get to Jonas Valanciunas without giving up a first round pick. And so in theory, this could just be a sign of like, that's what the Lakers are going to do. They're going to try and hit singles and doubles because they kind of understand they're not a contender as currently constructed, and there's no path for them to become one of the cap slot contenders as basically constructed. So why put these first round picks on the table? But there's still just a lot of time left until the trade deadline for names to kind of prop up. I would just be curious to see. I'm looking at it through my lens and saying, okay, I'm putting another floor general type as the priority here, do they still consider maybe another big, or even just, I'll say the Cam Johnson type, just another plug and play guy who comes in, fills minutes on the wings, doesn't necessarily generate his own shot, but is going to open up the floor for the guys who do, or the guys that you're going to trust to have the ball in their hands more. I don't know what to make of this trade in that bigger picture perspective, other than I think they officially need to lean towards, maybe it's not a floor general. You start because you're happy with how this starting lineup is performing. And then that allows you to kind of lower your sights, where if we just want kind of a passer or a game manager, what does San Antonio want for a healthy Trey Jones? Just as an example, if that's what you're setting your sights on, again, that might just be the reality of the Lakers situation. But it's like, I don't know why you would dislike this deal. I guess it's just, I saw some people that were having mixed feelings about it. And so if your team all future, okay, sure. Like, if you don't want them to give up at like those, just having second rounders gone in 2030 and 2031, that's not nothing. And that matters. But like, you're obligated to do something because you don't own your first round pick this year, and you have LeBron and AD on your team. And so if this was kind of the idea of, well, we're trying to make the most of this team without making any major changes for this year and next season, you've probably set yourself up to do that while keeping your first round picks. I am just curious though, because of the timing and just, I don't know, like Dorian Finney-Smith has money on the books for next season, and just the way that they gave up D'Angelo Russell, who functionally, as like conceptually, is important to this team because of what he's supposed to do, or the peak of D'Angelo Russell is supposed to do or can do. You now don't really have that. And so it makes me wonder, are they actually aiming bigger ahead of the trade deadline? And as someone who just is growing even more nostalgic for LeBron's career, as we crawl, maybe speed towards the end of it, I want to see them be more aggressive. And Dorian Finney-Smith, if I'm Anthony Davis specifically, that's not satisfying me. Yeah, we got better. This definitely fills a need that they had. But like, I'm not going to be happy unless they make kind of a bigger swing. And so if I had to guess, because we don't necessarily like hedging all the time, I think I probably would still lean that they're going to take the more conservative approach overall. But I think you have a stronger argument to say the Lakers are going to be serious this trade deadline, because one, they made this move early, but two, more importantly, the positional balances of this trade are just, they're a little off. I know they're getting back Shake Milton, but if you think like Shake Milton is going to play an important role on this team, or if that's the goal, that would concern me more than anything else about the front office's vision. And so I think it's a good move for the Lakers. I think it's a quality move for the Nets. I don't think there's any reason to dislike it for either side, unless the reasons to dislike this deal would be, if you're looking at it through the Nets lens, you should have just waited and taken a late first round pick had it cropped up, even if it was attached to salary on the books for next season and beyond. And then if from the Lakers end, unless you're going to go all in, there's no point in doing anything. And you should have kept those second round picks just because they're distant. And maybe they'd be in the 30s. If you're the Lakers, though, I would say the argument against, if you had to pick, I don't think there were losers in this deal, to be clear. I mean, maybe, yeah, I don't know who would be. I mean, like Maxwell Lewis is going to get more playing time. Is there a chance that because the Lakers is a team that doesn't have cap flexibility, Shake Milton, there's probably a stronger likelihood that his contract gets guaranteed beyond this year. So he's a potential small time winner as part of this deal. I would just argue the logic against this for the Lakers is way flimsier than it would be for the Nets, just because D'Lo didn't factor into your long term. And for teams that are, I'm not even saying bold text, italics text, title contenders, for teams that don't suck, this is why you have those second round picks, to have an opportunity to get someone who, in the Lakers case, I would argue is a top 6 player on their team. Like LeBron, AD, Austin Reeves, Rui. And if you want to throw Max Christie, I guess above him would be the move here, to say they're all more important than Dorian Finney-Smith. Those are the ones I'm prepared to, I guarantee like 4 players profile is more important. And you could even look, there might just be some people, because of what DFS gives you on the defensive end, they might argue he's more important than Rui, who's not going to give you too much there, even though his offensive efficiency since coming to LA overall has been up. I don't know why you wouldn't like this deal. for the Lakers, though. Like, I just don't see the second round pick. Yeah, there's stuff, and maybe we'll look back and that 2030 pick is number 33 or something, and we'll have to relitigate. Well, what ended up happening to the Lakers after this deal. But if this because it's so interesting in terms of the unknown for both these teams, because we kind of, at least I did, and I don't want to speak for Grant, but I think when we talked about it, we didn't expect the Lakers to make kind of a big move. But now that there's more mystery there, ambiguity there of, all right, like, because the positional balances just feel a little bit off here. They clearly didn't. I said, I don't know that losing D'Angelo Russell is actually going to harm their offense all that much. We'll have to see. But the idea of D'Angelo Russell losing him, there is a void there now. And so looking at that after this deal makes me wonder if the door is now open for the Lakers to do, whether you end up liking it or not, to do something that's more aggressive that we kind of all, I think the vast majority of people just view the Lakers as smoke and mirrors. They'll be linked to people, but they'll never either one have the assets to get him or the backbone to actually go after them and then get them, even if they can. I think this makes it more likely they will at least show the backbone to be aggressive ahead of the trade deadline. And I don't want to, I'm super intrigued by the Nets. We have to wait and see where their books are at after February 6th. And they were always going to have cap space anyway. But the fact that we're now 2 moves deep and they're trading, I would say 2 of the 5 players who were to be most involved in trade rumors, the remaining 3 being Cam Johnson, Cam Thomas, and Nick Claxton. The fact that they haven't taken back any serious long-term money yet, I'm putting a pin in that. I'm just putting a pin in that, and we can revisit it later. Let me know what you think about this trade in our Discord. The link to it's in the podcast and YouTube description, or just in the YouTube comments. Please remember to rate, review, subscribe across all platforms. Hit the sub button on YouTube. Definitely subscribe, Apple, Spotify, even if you don't use them. Leave ratings and reviews there. And comment on the video. What did you think of this trade? Any contrarian thoughts? What did I miss? Do you think the Lakers are going to be more aggressive moving forward? Do you think the Nets are actively prioritizing their cap space situation? But until next time, I leave you to shout out to the one, the only, the indelible, the legendary, will be in the NBA by the end of the season. I'm going to will it into existence, Frank Ntilikina.